Welcome to the Health Study How-To series. This video will cover studies of exposure. I'm Stephen, this is Kaylee, and that's Sam. Scientists around the world have documented evidence that certain environmental contaminants are hazardous to human health. For example, lead, mercury, and other toxic chemicals are all widespread in the environment and are known to cause health problems.
One way to protect people against the effect of these chemicals is to prevent exposure. One way to prevent exposure is to know where the chemicals are found in the environment and in what amount.
This can be done using studies of exposure. There are two basic approaches to studying exposures. We can measure chemicals in the environment, and we can measure chemicals in people. We will go over two study types, environmental monitoring and biomonitoring. In addition, we will briefly cover environmental impact statements.
First, environmental monitoring. Environmental monitoring measures pollutants in the environment, such as air, water, or soil. These studies usually span 6 months to 1 year, including planning time. The cost of these studies varies depends on what is measured, the equipment needed, and the laboratory analysis.
Now we will go over some examples of environmental monitoring. The first is the use of indicator species. For example, sampling mussels to assess the aquatic contamination levels.
Another example of environmental monitoring is personal exposure monitoring, where data are collected by individuals measuring exposures in their surroundings. This type of monitoring is common in studies of workers in occupational settings.
Another type of study is the bucket brigade, where community groups can take samples of air in their community and send these samples in a plastic bag to a lab for analysis. This has proven track record of changing air pollution controls.
Now that we've covered environmental monitoring, we'll go over biomonitoring. Biomonitoring measures chemicals in the body. This helps us study chemicals that are absorbed through the skin or chemicals that enter our bodies through the food we eat, the water we drink, and the air we breathe.
Biomonitoring is an important tool in identifying potentially harmful chemicals in people's bodies. Biomonitoring can help us understand what a person has been exposed to and how much of a chemical someone may have absorbed.
Biomonitoring can measure chemicals in bodily fluids or tissues, or from something produced by the body, such as urine, breast milk, exhaled air, hair, or fingernails.
Once you've measured the amount of the chemical in the environment or the body, how do you know if it's a problem? Ideally, you could compare your monitoring results to a reference or standard established by the Environmental Protection Agency or a state or local agency. Anything above a, quote, normal level would indicate exposures that could be considered unsafe.
Some caution and ethics while using biomonitoring. Biomonitoring studies or projects do determine that we all have foreign chemicals in our body. It is often unclear what the results mean for an individual's health. For most of the chemicals we measure in our bodies, we do not have enough scientific information to say what levels cause harm or what the health effects may be. This sort of information comes from scientific studies, which can take years to conduct, and even then may not give clear results. The mere presence of a chemical in the body does not mean that it's causing harm. On the other hand, usual or average levels are not necessarily without risk, or even without harmful effects.
This uncertainty creates difficult challenges. A study participant, knowing that his or her body has elevated levels of a chemical, may become confused and anxious about health risks. When study results are reported in the media, they can be confusing to the general public.
Here's a recap of biomonitoring. Biomonitoring measures the amounts of chemicals in the body and will tell you about exposure, not health outcomes. Amounts can be compared with national averages. Biomonitoring can take months depending on how many people are being studied. Testing can be costly depending on the chemicals being measured. In addition, biomonitoring may require medical expertise, laboratory analysis, and usually environmental health professionals for the explanation of the data.
Finally, we would like to briefly discuss environmental impact statements. Strictly speaking, an environmental impact statement is not a study of exposure, but we include environmental impact statements in this video because they may be useful resources to a community interested in exposures. An environmental impact statement is an evaluation of a proposed action, such as the construction of an incinerator, power plant, highway, train tracks, or landfill that's to be located in a community, with a consideration of alternatives. Environmental impact statements are published and available to the public. They give the community an opportunity to have a say in what is built in their community and what they're going to be exposed to.
Here's a quick recap of studies of exposure. There is environmental monitoring, which measures a chemical in an environmental medium. There is biomonitoring, which measures the concentration of a chemical in the body, and environmental impact statements, which provide a description of environmental changes, allows community say, and often influences policy.
This video is meant to give a brief overview of studies of exposure, so that you can decide which study type might be right for your community. While the studies may seem difficult or expensive, they're still possible in your community. Other study types, such as studies of health outcomes or studies of exposure outcome relationships, can also be found in the additional videos of this series. Thank you for watching.